Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel FRM Unplugged. As promised in my last series on FRM case study, I am back with the fifth in the series of FRM case studies, and today we will be dealing with the case of the Bearings Bank. So again, this Bearings Bank case study will usually be in FRM part 1, but you will find a fair sprinkling of issues associated with Bearings Bank also in part 2. So it's better you have an inside, a detailed view of it, and the way it is covered in most of the FRM books it's covered in a very high level, and it's covered more from a regulatory control perspective, which is perfect. But it would be better if we also have some more inside view on the kind of trades that this guy Nick Leeson used to do. And obviously, the entire thing came down to the reporting, the lax reporting and controls, which ultimately led to the downfall. Actually, his transactions were neither approved nor reported to their headquarters. So that is the heart and soul of this case. But it would, like I mentioned, it would be helpful if we also know the kind of trades that this guy executed, so that our knowledge is enriched with some of the option trading strategies which big traders usually do. This was Bearings was a pretty old bank compared to the other banks that we have seen in the case studies. This is pretty old, more than 200 years old, and this counted the Royal UK family as in their clientele, and most of the earlier promoters as well as senior management of the bank were usually associated or had relatives or some links with the nobility. So it was basically founded with the help of the royal family, and it also had the clientele amongst the royal family members. And it was a good bank basically, and it was based out of UK, a conservative bank at the outset. But eventually, uh, so the bank was started in in the second half of the 18th century, which is 1762, and it actually went bust in 1995. So the primary reason for the bank going bust was the unauthorized and unreported trading activities of one of their junior traders by the name of Nick Leeson. I think most of us would have heard about this name, and most of us would have some idea that okay, this was all about misreporting and other things. But like I mentioned, we will just take an additional look at the kind of trades that he used to do, and the losses of those unauthorized trades had ballooned to around 800, close to $800 million, and eventually the accumulated losses and other penalties and all, it totaled to around $1 billion, and eventually the bank was the bank ceased to exist because this amount was much more than the trading capital of the bank. So the outstanding was more than the capital. So obviously the bank's existence was at stake, and it ceased to exist from 1995. And the primary reason for the debacle was the unauthorized trades, and those the junior trader, was working out of their newly opened Singapore office, and he was mainly dealing in the Nikkei 225 futures, and he was basically authorized. The official job description, so to speak, for this guy was only making arbitrage trades. That's all. So arbitrage is a very less risky but less margin game and a high volume game basically. So he was sent for this purpose, which would have so he was supposed to do arbitrage trades on behalf of the customers. Bearings Capital was no way involved, at least that's what the official policy was. And subsequently beyond he started to involve the bank's capital also, which means he started doing proprietary trades which was not authorized by the bank's policy, and eventually the losses ballooned, and it went bankrupt. So if we look at the title of this case study, It's like the fox guarding the hen house, right? The fox is not supposed to guard the hen house, because here this guy, I mean, the person who is doing the trade should not be the one who is also recording it, right? And doing the settlement. Both of these are very separate. Chinese walls separate these two, but at late 90s or early 90s we will find many such. So in today's world we find this scenario, I mean, this scenario will never exist at all in 2024-25, but 30 years back this was prevalent. So a single person could, it's like I am also acquiring a loan customer and I am approving also the loan for that customer. So same thing was happening here, which is in today's world it's not there even for the lousiest of banks in the least compliant geography of this world. So before we get into it, it will be better if we familiarize with one or two terms many of us know, but just for the ones who are not that much aware. So stock index, futures and stock. So what is a stock index? Stock index is basically, it's a indicator of how the stocks would behave. So let's say S&P 500. S&P 500 is an index which tracks the top 500 companies in US. Similarly, this guy, where he was posted in Singapore, so he was doing the trading in Nikkei 225, which is, this is a stock index in Japan which monitors the top 225 companies. So this index works like this. Let's say there are only 3 shares which has, let's say, some A, B and C prices. So what the index will do, how the index function is, it will do a summation of A plus B plus C, remove the dollar, and so that amount A plus B plus C will indicate the stock index. So if it increases by, let's say, 1 point, then it will be a proportion of the increase. So in this example, so 30, 40 and 50, so 120 is the stock index, and if there is a 1 point movement upwards, this means additional $0.83 of investor wealth has been made. So as a layman, if I do not have the time, or if I do not have the money to do so many transactions in individual stocks, I can purchase a futures on the stock, and then I can hedge it. So if I have 5 stocks, I am long on the stocks, which means I hold those stocks, and I have a belief that these share prices can fall, right? So if I am not sure, if I feel that the stock prices can fall, so to hedge that, I will sell a Nikkei 225 futures, and the other way around. If I am expecting the price to rise, I will go long on the Nikkei 225 futures. As we all know in derivatives, a long position always benefits when the price increases, and a short position always benefits when the price decreases. So depending on my view of the market, I will take the help of this stock index futures. I will use it to hedge my existing portfolio of the shares of the equities. So why this is relevant? Because this guy Nick Leeson was, one of his official brief was to trade in Nikkei 225 futures on behalf of the clients, not on behalf of the bank. So the bank's capital was nowhere in picture. It was the customer's capital. And what he was supposed to do is, so Barings Bank was able to buy and sell both in Japan and in Singapore. So there was always a small price difference between same future. If I buy in Singapore and if I sell in let's say Japan, there is a small, very very small arbitrage margin. So arbitrage, as the name itself suggests, It's just making money due to price difference without employing substantial capital. So this guy Nick Leeson was supposed to do trading in this Nikkei 225 futures. That's why this topic is important. And the second option trading strategy that is important to us is a short straddle. So straddle is an option trading strategy. So short straddle means I am basically selling both a call and a put at the same strike price and at the same expiration time. So I am basically, when I have a view, I as in the investor has a view that the share price will be range bound. It will only vary from A to B, and I don't foresee much that the share price will not go beyond the upper limit or fall below the lower limit. Then as an investor, I will execute a short straddle. So the primary motivation behind a short straddle is earning the premium income. So so short straddle is basically selling one put option and one call option. So put option so when I am selling a put option, right, if the price increases, right, then the person who is long on this put, he is not going to sell it, right? So I am safe. And conversely, the other one for the so this was for the short put, and the other one is for the short call. So for short put, just to repeat and reiterate, for a short put, if the price increases, then my option expires worthless, because the long put is not going to exercise because the price has increased. So why will he sell? Similarly here, if the price has decreased, why will the long call sell, right? So in both the cases, so if the price is range bound between two, then I can earn some premium income. That is the motivation. So on a further illustration, if we see a share, let's say it's trading at 25, and the investor thinks that okay, it can go, let's say, up to maybe 28, 29, or it can come down till 22, 21. But it will not go beyond 29 or fall below 21. In case it goes above 29, then the losses that it will incur will be more than the premium income. So here, this example will make it more clearer. So the investor is selling one 25 call at $2 and selling one 25 put. So he is selling one call of 25 and one put of 25 for $2. So let's say if one contract has 100 shares, so there are 200 shares, and so 200 into 2 is $400 he is getting in his account as the premium income. Now, if the price is between 20 is at 28 or 22, so the strike price is 25, right? Now, if the actual at expiration, if the share price is 28, so the strike price was 25, the expiration share price is actually 28, which means it's high. So in this case, so there are two legs for this deal, right? One is the call and one is the put. So when the price has increased, a long call will benefit, which means the short call will do a loss. So here this guy investor had a short call and a short put. So the short call will have a loss, but the short put will have a gain. And this short call is having a loss, but that loss is getting offset by the premium income that this guy is having. And since price has increased, only the short call will lose. The short put will not lose. So the total premium income offsets the loss in this case, which the loss from the short call. So, and conversely, if this at expiration, if the share price would have been 22, 21, just the other way it would have happened. But if the price would have gone above 29, much above 29 or much below 21, then there would have been an actual net loss to the investor. So between 21 and 29, the investor is protected. The best possible scenario is 25. The worst possible scenario is 21 or 29. So why this is important? Because we will see that this guy Nick Leeson, what he used to do, he was going long on the Nikkei 225 futures with the hope that, so this guy was very bullish about Japanese economy. So he thought that the Nikkei 225 will always rise. So he had a long position, and we will see later. See, if I am having 10 long position, I will also need to have 10 short position, right? If I am a hedger, if I am an arbitrager, I am not going to leave it open just like that, right? Because if I am only having long, then I am exposed to the short side, right? So for every 4 long, I will have at least 3 short Nikkei 225 futures. But this guy didn't do that. Instead of 4, he used to buy 8 Nikkei 225 futures. So he was very bullish on it. He was an aggressive trader. He wanted to make more money. Rather than arbitrage, he wanted to be, drive the business and earn money. So once he was doing this long futures, so in long futures, what will happen is, if the prices rise very high, then a long future will be very profitable. So, and this short straddle, see, if the prices increase very high, this means if the price in this particular scenario, the price is going above 29, let's say 39 it's going, 45 it's going. So this short straddle is incurring some loss, but the long future is incurring the gain. So, and both are counterbalancing each other. Additionally, there is one more leg in short straddle that is earning money for this guy. So initially why he was doing short straddle? Because see, this short straddle was not in the picture earlier. He was only doing long futures. But at some point, the Nikkei 225 was not rising, and instead of rising, it was slowly coming down. So this guy expected it in the range of 19,000, 20,000, but it actually came below 17,000 or 18,000 kind of thing. So when the Nikkei 225, so this guy had whatever the long futures he had, he was, when the Nikkei 225 was coming down, we know that these futures are marked to market on a daily basis. So when the price is declining and I am in a long position, I will be required to put more money in my margin account. So I will receive a margin call. So I have to give additional money for the margin. Where will the money come from? Like speculative trading was not the agenda of Barings Bank. So he could not ask his headquarters that, okay, give me this money, I want to put in margin. He used to do this short straddle because he thought, even if the prices are decreasing, the prices increase. So this guy thought that prices will anyways increase. When he started getting the margin calls, he never thought about hedging. He further bought more in the hope that he will recover everything once the market recoups. So he always thought that this will happen and he will make money. So he just added as an add-on. We have an add-on credit card, an add-on offer. He just added on this short straddle in the hope that he will this so the price will increase. He will make money in futures. He will lose in the short straddle in the call option, but in the put option he will gain money. So and he was putting some good amount he was earning as a premium. That premium he would pay in the margin account. That was his plan, and it was only a temporary phenomenon because he thought eventually markets will improve, which never happened anyways because there were too many people who were selling, and additionally there was an earthquake where 6,500 people died in Japan, and some $1 trillion of losses was taken by the Japanese economy. So the Nikkei 225, anyways, it crashed. So this short straddle was a part of Nick Leeson's trading strategy. So, like we mentioned, he was authorized to do only arbitrage trades. He was authorized to use customers' money. He was not authorized to use the bank's money. But what he actually did was he basically started trading in the Nikkei 225 futures, and he started trading in banks' money. Which means he started doing proprietary trading, and the process that I just explained. He initially bought huge amount of futures, which eventually he had to face margin calls. Once the margin call started coming, he added on this short straddle. Again, the prices further declined. So when the prices further declined beyond that 21, so remember our example 21 and 29. So when the Nikkei 25 will, so 21 is just for this example. For Nikkei 2025, it was 17,000. So the 25 for the equivalent of 25 was around 19,000, and equivalent of 21 was 18,000. So Nikkei went to, let's say, 17,000, which was a huge amount, huge loss for this guy. So when the price has decreased, your long futures will not be, it will not make money. Similarly, your long call, this one leg of the short call is not making money, and the other leg of the short straddle, it is incurring losses. So sum total around 820 million pounds of losses were incurred, and which eventually ballooned to $1 billion. So, these are some of the details. He was basically, like I mentioned, he was going long on Nikkei 225 futures. He was also doing some additional trades, like he was having a short position in JGB, Japanese bond futures, and a short volatility position in Nikkei. So if we see, the main was the Nikkei 2. So if we leave the last one, the short volatility position in Nikkei. So the first two, the long in Nikkei and the short in JGB futures. So the long will yield profit when the price increases, and the short positions in Japanese bond will yield profits when the price declines. Just the opposite happened. So prices of Nikkei 225 declined, and the yield on this JGB futures, it increased. So both of these combined and made the losses more. So like everything is a mixed bag. So initially this strategy was paying off, but ideally this guy should have hedged his position, or maybe he was overtaken by his ambition, or we don't know what actually happened. He didn't hedge his position, and he further, there is something called doubling. So which means if the first, it's a more of a gambling casino term, but it's used by the concept is the same whether you play in a casino or play in a share market, that if you lose the first bet, then to recover that loss, you have to increase your second bet, and that increase is almost double of the first bet. then only you'll recover the first loss. That way he was losing and he was putting more. That way the amount became monstrous beyond the limit of the bank. And additionally what happened was there is some internal, see, errors typically happen in this kind of trading activities. So there is a designated trader error reconciliation account. This guy used to route many of his transactions to that through that 5888 accounts, and apparently 8 is a very lucky number for Chinese, so somehow he put those account numbers as 5 times 8, and he fiddled with the software, and he disconnected this error account from reporting purposes. So all these were, like, we all know, like, these things do not stand any chance in today's world, but at that point of time all these tricks worked actually, and the headquarters in UK did not have any inkling of what was going on. By the time they could realize, it had the losses had become unmanageable. And obviously we all have some idea, we all have some views on how this could be prevented. One obvious way was to separate the task of Nick Leeson. He should have only done or executed the trades, not on the settlement and the recording portion of it. And then there should have been proper risk management guidelines in place. There was no audit, and the audit was very superficial, so to speak. If you go further into details, which are not mentioned here, this guy got some. He had to deposit some $1 billion in Citibank's bearing account, and he did only half of it, and then he took some statement from Citibank. He made some copy paste thing, and he showed it to the auditors, and the auditors were impressed, and the auditors gave the go ahead. So all kinds of drama happened, and so the auditing was lax. There was no written risk management guidelines. There wasn't any, leave alone a Chinese world, there wasn't even in pen and paper separate jurisdiction between the trading and the settlement wing. So all this thing contributed to the to the collapse of Barings Bank. So I think that's all about this use case, and thanks for listening. If you found this to be useful, do consider subscribing and liking this channel, and if you have any queries, do post it in the comments. We will shortly come up with the next in the series with the London Whale. Thanks.